Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. Here's a second thing, and I'm always trying to be somewhat delicate with Aaron Rodgers because I'm viewed as anti-Aaron, but last year, 60 quarterbacks played in the league. And if I just said to you, forget the teams and the names, 40-year-old quarterback, off an Achilles surgery with a makeshift old and really young offensive line in a better conference, does that scream the quarterback plays 17 games? I think lost in this Jets improvement, and people love their roster, is, hey, they're a Breece Hall injury from being a have-to-pass offense. Have to pass. And now the good news, they shouldn't be in shootouts. Aaron shouldn't be forced to throw 44 times a game, but they got one back. And I tend to believe that championship teams are built when you have your 7 to 8 best players all in their prime. Like Detroit right now, Jared's in his prime. Hutchinson moved into it. That running back may be into it now. Amon St. Brown, Penei Sewell.
Laporta.
You're getting a lot of it. Now, they're all like moving into their prime. And you start looking at Green Bay, and it's like, I guess Breece probably is. Garrett Wilson's still raw. A lot of their defensive talent, Sauce Gardner's probably moving into it. But they got a lot of guys that aren't there or were never there. PFF last week had the Kansas City roster number 2, and I was like, they're bad at tackling, don't have a number 1 receiver. It's not the second best roster in the league. I look at the Jets and I just keep saying, if you gave me over under 15 games on Aaron, I'd bet the under.
Did you see
I'd
the
be
clip
like
last week of him scrambling to his right and kind of limping?
Yeah.
And whether you tell me it's blister prevention or whatever, that has to be pretty concerning. Because I will say this, last year at this time, and remember he dealt with a calf a little in OTAs, but when you saw him move around and he was healthy, he looked somewhat spry. He's 40 years old. And we have, I would say, pretty recent data of some legendary guys falling off a cliff for all different.
Matt Ryan.
And I would put him on the lower end of these players. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger. Most of my life when I was a kid in the 90s, guys got to like 35 in all pro sports and were done. And then Brady kind of changed it. LeBron kind of changed it. Most people fall off a cliff. And that's what I'm kind of.
Russell Wilson.
Yeah. And that's crazy, but he's not quite as quick anymore. He's not quite the athlete. Why? He's 34. He's not 26. Aaron's 40. 40. And part of the reason he's older, right? Because played several years in college, red-shirted, gray-shirted in the pros, didn't play for a while. So he's actually older, even though he hasn't been playing technically as long as some of those guys like Peyton Manning when he was 40. But I think there's a very good chance if you just base it off the history of sports, it usually ends poorly. You usually don't do John Elway, this one's for John, especially with the Jets, right? I mean, their offensive coordinator's not any good. He's just not. I mean, most teams in the league laugh at that situation, and he's there for one reason and one reason only, which I'm for the coach and the quarterback having a good relationship. That's how you and your producers have good it should be healthy if the guy is good at his job. Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady made a lot of sense. Kyle Shanahan and his quarterbacks, or Sean McVay and Matt Stafford. This guy's just not viewed as good enough. And last year, when Aaron left, it was an abomination. And these stories, because of the organization, what if they start slow? Now, I actually think they have an opportunity. I don't think their schedule is that hard early after the Niner game, but
it's a weird schedule. It's a lot of night games and short weeks.
They're just going to be covered like the Lakers or the Yankees. And we know things get weird with that franchise. And even if it's all about football, none of the other extracurricular stuff, if it's weird on offense, they're just going to point at the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. And then the head coach is going to be up there like saying who knows what. It could snowball into weirdness really quick. And like Aaron said, if I don't perform, we're all getting fired. I mean, that's what's on the line here.
Yeah, I think the schedule, I think it's viewed as easy. And we have to be honest, 7 teams that made the playoffs won't. 7 new ones will. You got to be careful about looking at last year. To me, the Colts and Washington could be. I mean, the Colts won 9 games with Gardner Minshew. I mean, Anthony Richardson, when he was playing, was
They were
jaw-dropping.
they were a
If they won
drop pass
11,
from winning that division last year.
yep. And Washington, I contend they're going to be probably the most improved NFC team. So you start looking at these teams. I did something the other day where since the league expanded to 14 playoff teams, 6.8 or 7 new teams make it every year. And I went through a list of teams. Some are obvious. Atlanta, big quarterback upgrade. Chargers, big coaching upgrade. Cincinnati, Burrow plays. I think Colts are really interesting. They're my surprise team potentially in the league. If I said to you, and I think the Jets have to, if Aaron's healthy, have to be considered. I thought last week was really interesting. So Miami signs Jalen Waddle to a massive deal, with Tyreek Hill already signing a stupendous contract. Okay, what are we saying here? So if Tua just signs the 10th biggest contract, that's Josh Allen now, who will get an extension or raise. They're $105 million, $105 million bucks, I think, something close to that, on 3 dudes, all on offense. Not a pass rusher, not a corner, not an interior defensive lineman, not an offensive tackle, 2 receivers and a quarterback. So I almost wondered.
3 small guys too.
Was Miami saying, listen, we're making our bet. We're just not going to have, this is our way of telling you, you're not getting $55 million. We're just not going to give you that. Because I don't know. I know Dak has a market. I've talked to 2 GMs
the Raiders would sign him
who
yesterday.
have told me yesterday. And I think very quickly, if the Drake May thing looks awful, they'd sniff at it. I mean, New Orleans with Derek Carr, I don't think they're in luck. Giants, Daniel Jones. What is Tua's market?
I don't think it would be that good. But he's not my type player. But we also know when you hit free agency at that position, people overspend. But who is giving Tua $150 million on the open market? Who is? I can't see. Did you see the picture of him at the charity event? He looked like he was on Ozempic. He looks tiny. He looks really, really skinny. I'm not into small guys who aren't great athletes with average arms. Just not really my style. I mean, I like my quarterbacks to be a little bigger, a little more mobile with howitzers. Because when you look at Tua, in theory, he should be this kind of mobile little guy, but he is much closer to Jared Goff the way he plays. I've said it over and over. Here's what Dak has proven now. He's given me 3 straight years of 12 wins. Do I want to give him $50+ million? I do not. Is there an opportunity that if he gets hot one postseason, they could win a couple games like an Eli Manning situation 100%? I don't believe Tua has that capability. What we witnessed last year, I mean, if this was like the Indy 500, they were up like several laps. The Bills were leaking oil. They were 6-6. Then the season ends. They win the division, and they're hosting playoff games, and Miami has to go on the road. And even when I saw Veach at the Combine, he's like, I've been in the NFL a long time. That was the coldest game I've ever stood on the field for when he played the Chiefs. And we felt pretty good about our chances because we knew that offense couldn't function in the freezing cold. But they wouldn't have had a chance in a cold weather game against Baltimore, against any of these teams. So part of it is the AFC. If you spend all this money on Tua, because at the end of the day, could Dak, it hasn't gone well these last 3 years, but beat a Purdy, beat a Jared Goff if he plays right. How is Tua ever going to outplay Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Herbert now with Harbaugh, Josh Allen? It's not happening. It doesn't mean he's not a solid NFL starter, but once you start talking about the money, this is not baseball. You don't have an unlimited amount of cap space. Tyreek Hill, he's one of the greatest players I've ever seen. No problem investing. Jalen Waddle, you draft him high. He's a productive player. I get it. Tua, why can't we just play this out? Why does every quarterback have to get in it? Jared Goff proved last year. He went toe-to-toe with Matt Stafford in the playoff game. He won the second playoff game against Baker Mayfield. He was great against the 49ers. They have tangible evidence now in the playoffs, let alone the regular season now for a year and a half. Where's that evidence against Tua? He plays well in October. Well, you're in the AFC where most of these teams come November and December. I looked at their schedule whenever the schedules came out. They had 3 or 4 games post, Halloween. They get a little cold, Colin. Get a little cold. What if you can't do it this year? If you can't win the division and host a playoff game, which they would have to do to have success in the playoffs because of their climate, what's the point of extending them? Just to say you have a quarterback?
Well, and last year, I've said this. Last year in the AFC, it was the year. Aaron gets hurt. Bills start slowly. Burrow gets hurt. Deshaun and Cleveland are a head scratching mess. Anthony Richardson hurt. CJ Stroud's only a
Brandon
rookie.
Staley with the
Trevor
Chargers.
Lawrence and Trevor Lawrence injured every part of his lower torso like in the last 8 weeks. It was the year. And they didn't do it. So Aaron's back.